guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos, and today we have a tutorial for this Boatneck Mod Dress. Now this pattern comes in 3 different variations: style A, the plain version; style B, which is very similar to style A but it has that color blocked skirt; and then there's style C, which is a midi length dress. Now there are 2 optional design elements that can be transferred for style A, B, or C. The first is the waist ties. You can do either version of the waist ties on any of the dresses, and then the second is the keyhole, which I'm going to show through style C in this video, but you can also do the keyhole for style A and B. So the pattern will be the first link down below, and you guys know I love to reward my subscribers who have their notification bells turned on, so you can use the code Strawberry Jam in honor of this beautiful strawberry jam fabric for 30% off this pattern until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. Style A of this dress is a very beginner friendly pattern. Style B gets a little bit harder because of that color block skirt, but it's still doable for a beginner, and then I've ranked style C as intermediate. To see all of the supplies and materials required for this project, that is in the first link down below in the listing description of the pattern. And if you're interested to see just the equipment and tools that I use throughout the video, that will be down below in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's just get into the tutorial. So as usual, print out your pattern at 100% scale, and then line up your pieces of paper edge to edge without trimming down or overlapping your sheets of paper, and tape together. Make sure you refer to your instruction pamphlet for very detailed printing and assembly instructions. Also refer to the size chart in the instruction pamphlet to figure out what size you would like to create and cut on the corresponding line. For me, I'm actually going to blend between sizes, so I'm going to show you how I do that today because I get that question a lot. For me, I'm going to use a size 2 for the bust and the waist, and I'm going to use a size 4 for the hips. Blending between sizes is very easy. Just identify the sizes you want to blend and connect them with smooth lines. The most important thing is just to make sure that you're consistent where you're changing sizes. So if I want to be a size 4 at the hips, I'm going to make sure to blend all pattern pieces. And it's truly as simple as that. Now just cut out your fabric and make sure you're reading the pattern details on each pattern piece. Now first we're going to do style A and B because they're very similar. The only difference is style B has that color blocked skirt. So if you're doing either style A or B, this is the tutorial for you. And if you're doing style C, I would actually recommend watching part 1 because I'm going to go very in depth on all the techniques in this part. So I just want to point out for my beginners, there are a lot of darts in this project, and darts are meant to be marked and not cut. I strongly recommend using a tracing wheel and tracing paper to transfer your dart markings to the wrong side of your fabric, but you can also use other marking tools such as fabric markers and tailor's chalk. And moving on to sewing, step 1 is to sew all of the darts on this dress. Again, for my beginners, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on how I like to sew my darts. So fold your fabric right sides together along the center of that dart and pin along the dart legs. And make sure you're pinning directly through both of those dart legs. This is going to help make sure that you sew that dart perfectly later on. When I'm sewing my darts, when I get to the dart point, I also like, instead of back stitching to finish off my stitch, I like to tie off the threads by hand. And to do this, all you need to do is tie a double knot. Leave about 1 inch of thread at the end and clip. And then you have hand tied darts. This just helps to reduce the bulk that is caused by back stitching at your dart points. So no matter what style you're creating, you have 6 darts total to sew on your bodice front, 2 darts total to sew on your bodice back, and 2 darts total to sew on your skirt back pieces, which makes 10 darts total to sew. Once you've sewn all of your darts, you're going to begin assembling your dress. So starting with the back, place your back bodice pieces right sides together with your back skirt pieces at the waistline and pin, sew, and serge. Alright, style B, this is the only difference between style A and style B, and that is the color blocked skirt, which of course, for the front, you're going to take the skirt and you're going to take the bodice, place them right sides together at that seam, and sew. It sounds simple, however, these are reverse curve seams, meaning when you flip the skirt to be right sides together with the bodice, suddenly it looks like it's really hard to pin. My tips for you, number 1, go so slowly. Number 2, use a ton of pins and take your time when pinning, not just while sewing. Third tip, pin in sections. And tip 4 is that you're going to have to ease the outside curves into the inside curves. Reverse curves tend to be very hard to sew just because when you add the seam allowance, it makes the raw edges of the seam different lengths. While the stitch line is the same length, now adding the seam allowance makes the raw edges different lengths. So again, go super slow and sew with care. And once you sew the front, you can do the exact same thing to the back. So you're gonna sew the upper skirt pieces to the lower skirt pieces, right sides together. Now we're going to create the optional waist tie pieces. You don't have to add them if you don't want. I'm going to show you how to install them into your dress, but you'll notice that I actually omitted them for style A in the end. All right, step one, you'll have 2 pieces for your waist ties. Fold them right sides together, long ways. Sew down one short edge, pivot at the corner, and sew down the long edge. Do not sew down the other short edge. Then trim your seam allowance to about 1/4 inch. I'm choosing to use pinking shears. Totally optional, it just helps reduce additional fraying, but it's not a huge concern. Then flip your waist tie pieces right sides out again using a loop turner or a safety pin. Give your waist tie pieces a good press, and then they're ready to sew into your dress. So take your front dress and place it right sides together with your back dress pieces and pin along the shoulder seams and the side seams, sandwiching in your waist tie pieces in between the side seams. You're gonna line up the raw edge of your waist tie pieces with the side seams, and make sure you're also aligning your waist tie pieces with the waistline seam on the back dress. Then you can sew, serge, and press the shoulder seams and the side seams. Now you're going to repeat all of those steps again for the lining dress, minus the waist ties. So you're gonna sew the darts, sew the back waistline seam, and then attach the front dress to the back dress at the shoulder and side seams. Now we're going to prep to insert the invisible zipper by serging the center back edges of the dress shell independently. So you're gonna serge the left side, then you're gonna serge the right side. Now we can insert the invisible zipper. And if you've never done this before, here's my little trick. So I like to pin one side of the invisible zipper to the dress, place them right sides together, pin, and then I baste the zipper in. To baste the zipper, either hand baste or use the longest stitch length on your machine. Don't worry about getting too close to the zipper teeth, just baste her in. Then zip up your zipper and use pins to mark where the zipper passes the waistline seam and where you should stop sewing the zipper. Then you can unzip your zipper, flip the other side of the zipper tape over, and use those pins to help you correctly place the other side of your zipper. Now baste this side of the zipper in, zip it back up to make sure everything's lining up, and then you can sew super close to your zipper teeth either with a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot to permanently sew your zipper in. Now back to your regular stitch length. Then just close up the rest of the center back seam below your zipper by sewing the seam right sides together. Now we're going to prep the lining the same way we did the shell for the invisible zipper. So just serge the center back of the lining piece independently. Now you can place your lining and your shell right sides together and pin along the neckline. Have your zipper unzipped so that you can also pin the lining and the shell together at the center back seam, only where the zipper is sewn. So the zipper is kind of sandwiched in between the right sides of both the shell and the lining, and you're gonna pin through the shell, lining, and the zipper. You're gonna sew from where the zipper stop is up the center back seam using 1/4 inch seam allowance. Pivot your work and sew along the neckline using 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then you're gonna pivot your work again at the center back seam, sew down the center back seam with 1/4 inch seam allowance, stopping at the zipper stop when you can sew no more. Now just serge your neckline, clip the curves of your neckline so it's able to lay nice and flat, and then we're going to understitch the neckline. So to understitch, I have the shell of the dress on the left, the lining of the dress on the right, and the seam allowance underneath pointed towards the right or the lining. I'm gonna sew about 1/16 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch away from the neckline seam through both the lining and the seam allowance. And this is just going to help the neckline lay really flat and prevent the lining from rolling out when you're wearing the garment. Now just close up the center back seam of the lining below where the zipper is using 1/2 inch seam allowance. Almost done, 2 steps left. For this step, we are going to finish the arm size with bias tape. So take your 1/4 inch double fold bias tape and press the short edge under 1/2 inch. You're gonna line up the short edge of the bias tape with the side seam of your arm side, and you're gonna line up the long edge of the bias tape with the raw edge of your arm side. Sew along the first crease in the bias tape. The first crease is the one closest to the raw edge, all the way around the arm side. When you get back to the beginning, overlap the bias tape by a 1/2 inch, backstitch of course, and then clip off the remaining bias tape. Now bring this over to your iron. Fold the bias tape back to how it originally was, so close it up, and it should close around the raw edge of your dress, and give it a nice press. Once you've done that, you're going to fold the bias tape one more time under towards the wrong side of the garment. So from the right side of the garment, you will not see the bias tape, and give this a good press. Bring this back over to your sewing machine, and you're going to stitch down very, very close to the unsewn edge of the bias tape, and this will complete your hidden bias tape finish. The very last step is to hem your dress. So you have a 1-inch hem allowance. For me personally, I have lengthened my dress already before cutting because I am super tall. But my recommendation is to always try on your dress first to make sure this is where you want to hem it. You might want to trim it down before hemming. But yes, you have 1-inch hem allowance. So you're just going to fold up the hem of your dress 1/2 inch twice, give it a good press, and then top stitch that in place. Now this dress is fully lined, so you're going to have to repeat the hemming process for the lining. Before hemming the lining, trim down your lining 1 inch so that your finished lining length will be 1 inch shorter than your shell, and it will not be visible at all from the outside of your garments. And after you've hemmed both the shell and the lining, you are done. Now we're gonna move on to style C. And if you skip the first part of the video, I highly recommend that you watch how to sew style A and B, because in that I teach you in depth how to do each step. So I go in depth on how to do a hidden bias tape armhole, how to insert an invisible zipper. Whereas for this, since we've already explained it once, I'll just be saying simply insert the invisible zipper. So let's get started with style C. Step 1 is to mark and sew all of your darts. So you have 6 darts on the front bodice and 4 darts on the back. Then place your back bodice right sides together with your back skirt pieces and pin, sew, serge, and press along the waistline. For style C, we have these longer waist ties, which again are optional. Since I'm using chiffon, we are going to sew French seams. If you are not using a sheer fabric, then you do not have to sew French seams, and you can simply fold your fabric right sides together and sew a plain seam and then flip it right side out. But because we have a sheer fabric, we need to do French seams. So fold your fabric long ways, wrong sides together, and you're gonna sew along the long edge and the slanted edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then trim down your seam allowance to be 1/8 of an inch. Press your seam open and then flip it inside out. Now sew with 1/4 inch seam allowance exactly where you just sewed, so along the long edge and the slanted edge. Press your seam one more time, flip it right side out, and you have your French seam. Now we're gonna prep the raw edge of the waist ties to be gathered. So to do this, sew 2 rows of basting stitches within the seam allowance of that short raw edge. Do not backstitch at the beginning or end of your stitches. Then grab onto the bobbin threads and gently pull the fabric, and it will begin to gather. How much you gather this is up to you. I gathered it to be about 1.25 inches, and then I placed this raw edge to the right side of the back dress pieces along the side seam, right in the middle of where that waistline seam is. Pin that in place, and then place your front dress piece right sides together on top of the back dress pieces, sandwiching the waist ties in between, and pin along the side seams and the shoulder seams. Then sew, serge, and press those seams. Now moving on to the skirt. Again, I'm using a sheer fabric, so I'm going to do French seams, which we just learned how to do a second ago with the waist ties. So sewing the shell skirt first, we're going to place the front skirt and the back skirt pieces together at the side seams. I'm going to place them wrong sides together to do French seams, and I'm going to sew the French seams for the side seams. Make sure you're placing the left and right back skirts at the corresponding sides of the front skirt. So I would lay out your bodice probably and just make sure that that curve is lining up correctly. Now we need to sew the skirt lining. So again, I'm going to do French seams as well for this. It's up to you if you choose to use French seams or not. I'm going to place my front skirt lining with the back skirt lining pieces at the side seams and sew French seams. And of course, give everything a good press. Now we're going to connect the skirts to the bodices. So starting with the shell, place the skirt and the bodice right sides together along that hem. Now, of course, it is a reverse curve hem, so you're gonna wanna use a lot of pins to keep it in place and to go very slowly while you're sewing the seam. So sew, serge, and press the seam. And also, if you skipped part 1, I definitely would go back and watch it because we went a little bit more in depth on how to sew reverse curves there. Now repeat this step of attaching the skirt to the bodice for the lining. Now we can insert our invisible zipper. So just insert your invisible zipper into the shell and then close up under the invisible zipper by sewing that center back seam right sides together and then give it a good press. And now we're going to go into the optional keyhole design. If you are doing the keyhole, fuse your interfacing to the wrong side of the lining. I recommend drawing on your stitch line using a pencil or some other marking tool on the interfacing so you know where to sew later on. It's going to make it a whole lot easier. Now place your shell dress and your lining dress right sides together and pin along the neckline and pin along the center back seam just where the zipper is sewn. So the zipper should be sandwiched in between the lining and the shell, and you can pin through all 3 of those layers. You're going to sew from where the zipper stop is up towards the neckline with 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you get to the neckline, pivot your work and sew the neckline with 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you get to the end of the neckline, pivot your work and sew down to the zipper stop with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim your corners and clip your curves and then understitch the neckline. And understitching is explained more in part 1. Now, if you're doing the keyhole, we are ready to sew the keyhole. So choose what button you'd like to use. My recommendation for button size would be 3/8 of an inch or about 10 millimeters for the diameter of the button. And then you're gonna need round elastic cord. So cut a little snip of your elastic. You can just cut off a couple inches and then fold that in half. You're gonna sandwich this elastic between the shell and the lining at the very top of the neckline. So I'm just gonna squish it all the way up there. And when you're deciding when to place it, you'd basically just have to have a big enough loop to be able to stretch around your button. So pin this in place and then use the line that you marked earlier for your keyhole as a guide for your stitching. Make sure you like the size of the loop that you sewed into the neckline, and once you confirm that, stitch over the elastic a few more times to really lock that in place. Now use your scissors to trim down the seam allowance about 1/4 of an inch away from the stitch line and then clip around those curves. This is super important because if you don't clip enough, your keyhole is gonna look a little bit spiky. So if you want it to be smooth, make sure you do a lot of clips around the keyhole. Then flip your dress right side out and give it a good press around the keyhole and neckline. Now we're gonna move on to finishing the arm's eye. So we're gonna use a hidden bias tape binding to finish this arm's eye. And again, this technique is described in depth in part 1. Now we can move on to the hem, and we are going to do rolled hems for this dress. Make sure you try on the dress first, of course, and mark where you'd like it to be hemmed, and cut your shell to be 1 inch longer than what you'd like the finished hem length to be, and cut your lining 1 inch shorter than the shell because we want the lining to be a little bit shorter than the shell. To create the rolled hem, fold under your hem allowance 3/4 of an inch and give it a press. Then sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the hem edge. Use your scissors to trim very, very close to the stitch line that you just created. Trim to but not through that stitch line. Bring it back over to your iron and turn up that hem one more time and give it a good press. Then bring it back over to your sewing machine and top stitch that edge down to finish your rolled hem. Repeat this for the lining, and then your last step would be to sew on your button. So just sew the button to the opposite edge of the neckline that the elastic is sewn to, and then after that, you are done. All right, so that is how you sew this Boatneck Mod Dress. Let me know if you plan on sewing style A, B, or C. Personally, I think my favorite is actually probably style C, but style A is so quick and easy to sew, so it's a tough choice. It's a tough choice. But yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. Feel free to let me know what patterns you want to see in the future from me. And don't forget that the pattern to this is the first link down below, and you can use the code STRAWBERRYJAM to get 30% off this pattern until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. But yeah, if you like this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up because it's the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonollo. Subscribe. Turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss out on pattern discounts in the future, and I'll see you next time. Bye!